The massive crystal towers of the Galactic Council reached high into the purple sky of their home planet. Inside the biggest tower sat beings who thought they were the masters of everything in space. These aliens had blue skin that shined like metal and 4 arms each. Their eyes glowed with a cold light that showed no kindness. For over 5,000 years they had ruled hundreds of worlds with iron fists. They called themselves the Council, and believed that all other life forms were just animals to be controlled. High Counselor Vextar sat on his golden throne in the center of the Great Hall. He was the oldest and most cruel of all the Council members. His body was twice the size of the others and covered in scars from ancient battles. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. Around him sat 12 other Council members, all wearing robes made from the finest materials stolen from conquered worlds. They spent their days making rules that kept other species as slaves and deciding which planets to attack next. The Council had a simple way of dealing with new species. When aliens first learned to travel between stars, they would receive a visit from Council ships. The Council would demand complete surrender and total obedience. Species that agreed became slaves. Species that refused were destroyed completely. No exceptions were ever made. This system had worked perfectly for thousands of years, and the Council saw no reason to change it. On a small blue planet far from the Council towers, humans had just built their first ships that could travel to other stars. Captain Lee Daeho stood on the bridge of the human ship called New Hope as it approached the Council homeworld. Lee was a brave man in his 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He truly believed that meeting other intelligent life would be the greatest moment in human history. Behind him stood his crew of 20 other humans, all excited about making first contact with aliens. Lee had spent months preparing for this meeting. He brought gifts from Earth, including art music and examples of human science. The humans had no weapons on their ship because they wanted to show they came in peace. Lee wore his best uniform and practiced the speech he would give to welcome Earth into the galactic community. He dreamed of the knowledge humans could share with other species and the wonders they might learn in return. The New Hope landed on a platform outside the Council towers where hundreds of other alien ships sat waiting. Lee noticed that many of these ships had chains and bars on them like they were prison transports. This made him feel uneasy, but he pushed the worry from his mind. Surely the advanced aliens of the Council were civilized beings who would understand human hopes for friendship. Lee and 5 other humans walked through the crystal doors of the main tower. The hallways were filled with aliens from dozens of different worlds. But Lee noticed something strange. All these aliens looked scared and kept their heads down as they walked. None of them made eye contact with the humans or each other. Guards, with energy weapons, watched them carefully from every corner. This was not the happy galactic community that Lee had imagined. The Great Hall of the Council was enormous. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness above. Thousands of seats filled the space, but only the 12 Council members and their guards were present. The other seats sat empty like silent witnesses to whatever was about to happen. Lee felt very small as he walked down the long path toward the golden throne where Vextar waited. When Lee reached the center of the hall, he bowed respectfully and began his prepared speech. He spoke of humanity's desire for peace and friendship. He offered to share human knowledge and culture with the Council. He promised that Earth would be a good neighbor to all species in the galaxy. His words echoed in the vast empty space as the Council members listened in complete silence. When Lee finished speaking, Vextar began to laugh. It was not a happy laugh, but a cruel sound that made Lee's blood turn cold. The other Council members joined in, and soon the entire hall filled with their mocking laughter. Lee stood there confused and embarrassed as the aliens made fun of everything he had said. Vextar stood up from his throne, and his 4 arms spread wide. His glowing eyes looked down at Lee like he was studying an interesting insect. The High Counselor's voice boomed through the hall as he spoke. He told Lee that humans were weak, primitive creatures who had barely learned to fly between planets. He said that Earth's history was filled with wars and violence which proved that humans could not be trusted to live freely in the galaxy. The Council had already made their decision about humanity before Lee ever arrived. They had studied Earth for months and decided that humans were too dangerous to exist as a free species. Vextar announced that humanity would become slaves of the Council. Human colonies would be occupied by Council forces. Human children would be taken from their parents and trained to serve alien masters. Human adults would work in mines and factories until they died. Lee tried to argue and beg for mercy, but the council members just laughed harder. They pushed him around the hall like he was a toy for their amusement. Vextar grabbed Lee with two of his massive arms and lifted him off the ground. He told the human captain that his species should feel honored to serve their betters. The other council members placed bets on how long it would take to break human resistance completely. Vextar threw Lee back to the ground and announced that humanity had 7 days to surrender. If Earth did not accept slavery willingly, then the council would destroy every human colony and kill billions of people. Council ships were already moving toward human space to begin the blockade. Lee and his crew were allowed to return to Earth to deliver the ultimatum, but their ship would be followed by council forces. As Lee stumbled out of the Great Hall, his mind raced with horror at what he had learned. This was not first contact with a peaceful galactic community. This was a death sentence for his entire species. The council had done this to hundreds of other species before, and they felt no guilt or shame about it. To them, humans were just the latest victims in their long history of conquest and slavery. The New Hope left the council world under heavy guard with Lee and his crew in complete shock. They had come seeking friendship and found only cruelty. They had offered peace and been given war. The 7-day countdown to slavery had begun, and Lee knew that everything humanity had ever dreamed about the stars was about to become a nightmare that would last forever. The news from Captain Lee Daho hit Earth like a giant rock falling from space. Within hours, every television, radio, and computer screen showed the same terrible message. Humanity had 7 days to surrender or face complete destruction. People poured into the streets of every city on Earth. Some cried in fear while others shouted in anger. But most humans felt something much more dangerous than fear or sadness. They felt pure burning rage at aliens who dared to threaten their families and their world. In Seoul, South Korea, Dr. Kim Tae-sung received the news while working late in his laboratory deep underground. Kim was a thin man in his 50s who had spent his whole life studying science and technology. His laboratory was hidden beneath the city in old tunnels that most people had forgotten about. For the past 3 years, Kim had been working on a secret project that only a few government officials knew about. He had been preparing for exactly this kind of threat. Kim called an emergency meeting of his research team. 20 of the brightest scientists and engineers in Asia gathered in the hidden laboratory within hours of his call. They had been working together in secret since the first human colonies were established. Kim had always believed that humans would eventually meet hostile aliens, and he wanted Earth to be ready. While other people dreamed of peaceful contact, Kim prepared for war. The secret laboratory contained technology that would amaze most humans. Kim and his team had been studying theoretical alien science for years. They built experimental weapons and defensive systems based on what they thought alien technology might look like. They created new materials that were stronger than anything else on Earth. They designed ships and computers that could work in deep space. All of this was done in complete secrecy, without any help from world governments. General Choi Min-ho commanded the South Korean military forces, but he also worked closely with Kim's secret project. Choi was a tough soldier in his 60s who had fought in several wars during his career. He understood that sometimes the best way to keep peace was to be ready for war. When the council's ultimatum arrived, Choi immediately activated hidden networks that connected military leaders around the world. The underground resistance grew faster than anyone expected. Within the first day after Lee's return, millions of humans volunteered to fight against the council. Old enemies became allies as nations that had fought each other for centuries united against the alien threat. Russian generals worked with American admirals. Chinese scientists shared research with European engineers. African leaders coordinated with South American commanders. The council had made one huge mistake. They thought threatening humanity would make humans scared and weak. Instead, it made them angry and united. Yoon Ji-ae was only 25 years old, but she was already one of the best computer programmers in the world. She worked for a technology company in Seoul during the day, but spent her nights doing something much more interesting. Ji-ae was part of a secret group of hackers who had been trying to break into alien computer systems for months. Most people thought this was impossible since humans had never seen alien technology. But GA and her team were very good at finding patterns and solving puzzles. The hacker team had been studying radio signals from space for years. Every time alien ships passed near Earth, they left electronic traces that could be analyzed. GA discovered that alien computers used mathematical principles that were similar to human computers. This meant that with enough time and effort, human hackers might be able to break into alien networks. The Council's ultimatum gave them the motivation they needed to try their most dangerous attacks. Captain Han Soo-jin led a special forces unit that most people did not know existed. Han was a small, quiet woman who looked like she could not hurt anyone. But she was actually one of the most dangerous fighters in the Korean military. Her team specialized in missions that were so secret that even other soldiers did not know about them. When the Council's ships began arriving in Earth's solar system, Han's team prepared to strike at targets that the aliens would never expect. The Council forces took positions around Earth and began their blockade exactly as Vextar had promised. Huge alien ships appeared in the sky above every major city. The aliens broadcast messages demanding surrender and threatening destruction if humans resisted. Council soldiers landed on the moon and began building bases there. Everything seemed to be going according to the Council's plans. They had done this same thing to hundreds of other species, and it always ended with complete victory for the Council. But the aliens made a crucial error in their planning. They assumed that humans would react the same way as every other species they had conquered. Most aliens became scared and hopeless when faced with Council ships. They would try to negotiate or beg for mercy. Some would fight back with traditional weapons, but they always failed because Council technology was too advanced. The Council expected humans to follow this same pattern and prepared their forces accordingly. Instead, humans did something completely different. Rather than trying to fight the alien ships directly, they seemed to simply disappear. Council soldiers found empty military bases and abandoned government buildings. Human leaders stopped answering communications from the alien fleet. Streets that should have been full of panicked people were strangely quiet. The Council assumed that humans were hiding in fear and preparing to surrender early. The truth was much different. Humans had moved their resistance operations underground in the most literal sense possible. Old subway tunnels became weapon factories. Abandoned mines became training camps. Underground bunkers became command centers. The same city streets that looked empty to alien observers were actually full of activity happening beneath the Council's feet. Humans were preparing for a kind of warfare that the proud Council had never faced before. Kim's scientists worked around the clock to analyze pieces of Council technology that Han's teams brought back from successful raids. Every alien device they captured taught them more about how Council systems worked. They discovered that the aliens relied heavily on central computer networks to coordinate their forces. They also found that Council weapons and shields had design flaws that could be exploited by someone who understood the physics involved. As the 7-day deadline approached, the Council grew more confident that humans would surrender without a fight. Their ships had blockaded every human colony, and their soldiers controlled key strategic points throughout the solar system. Vextar sent messages to Earth promising that humans who surrendered quickly would be treated better than those who resisted. He truly believed that he had already won another easy victory for the Council. But deep underground on Earth, humans were putting the finishing touches on a plan that would shock the entire galaxy. The countdown to surrender was almost over, but humans were counting down to something completely different. The Council's arrogance had blinded them to the storm that was building beneath their feet. Soon they would learn that underestimating human determination was the biggest mistake they had ever made in their long history of conquest. With only 48 hours remaining before the surrender deadline, the most important phase of humanity's plan began to unfold. Dr. Kim Tae-sung stood in his underground laboratory surrounded by months of stolen alien technology and careful research. His team had discovered something incredible about Council ships that would change everything. The aliens were so confident in their superior technology that they had never bothered to fix a critical weakness in their defense systems. Kim's analysis showed that Council shields operated on a specific energy frequency that could be disrupted by the right kind of electromagnetic pulse. The aliens assumed that no primitive species would ever be smart enough to figure this out. They had used the same shield design for thousands of years, without ever changing it. This overconfidence was about to become their downfall. Kim's team had built weapons specifically designed to exploit this weakness and turn the Council's greatest strength into their greatest vulnerability. Captain Lee Dae-ho prepared for the most dangerous acting performance of his life. He would return to the Council chambers one final time, pretending to deliver humanity's formal surrender. Lee practiced looking defeated and broken, even though inside he felt more determined than ever. He knew that if the Council suspected anything was wrong, they would attack Earth immediately and kill billions of people. Everything depended on his ability to convince them that humans had given up all hope. Lee's ship approached the Council, homeworld under heavy guard, just as it had during his first visit. This time, however, Lee carried much more than diplomatic gifts. Hidden throughout his clothing and equipment were dozens of tiny devices that Kim's team had built. These devices were smaller than coins and completely undetectable by Council security. Scanners. Each one contained enough electromagnetic energy to cause massive disruptions in alien computer systems when activated simultaneously. The Council members waited for Lee in the same great hall where they had first mocked human hopes for peace. Vextar sat on his golden throne looking pleased with himself as Lee walked slowly down the long path toward him. The other Council members whispered among themselves about how they would divide up Earth's resources after the humans surrendered. They had already planned which human cities would become slave camps and which would be destroyed as examples. Lee knelt before Vextar's throne and began his surrender speech. He spoke of humanity's regret for resisting the Council's wisdom. He begged for mercy for his people and promised that humans would serve their alien masters faithfully. His voice shook with what the Council assumed was fear, but was actually barely controlled rage. As Lee spoke, he carefully placed the tiny devices in locations throughout the Great Hall that Kim had marked on secret diagrams. Vextar enjoyed every moment of Lee's performance. The High Counselor stood up and made a long speech about how humans should feel honored to serve the Council. He described in detail how human children would be taken from their parents and trained as slaves. He explained how human colonies would be strip-mined for resources until nothing remained. The other Council members laughed and applauded as their EQ leader painted a picture of humanity's grim future. While the Council celebrated their expected victory, Admiral Park So-min made final preparations for humanity's hidden fleet. These ships had been built in secret over the past 3 years using asteroid mining bases that the Council had never detected. The human fleet was much smaller than the Council's massive armada, but size was not what would determine the outcome of this battle. Speed, surprise, and superior knowledge of the enemy's weaknesses would be the deciding factors. Park was a brilliant naval officer who had studied every famous battle in human history. She understood that smaller forces could defeat larger ones if they used the right tactics. Her ships were designed to be fast and maneuverable rather than heavily armored. They carried Kim's special weapons that could penetrate Council shields, and sophisticated jamming equipment that could disrupt alien communications. Most importantly, they were crewed by volunteers who knew they were fighting for the survival of their entire species. The human fleet hid behind asteroids and small moons throughout the solar system, waiting for the signal to attack. Park had positioned her forces so that they could strike at the Council's ships from multiple directions simultaneously. The alien commanders had arranged their fleet in the same formation they always used when accepting surrender from conquered species. They never imagined that they might need to defend themselves from the primitives they were about to enslave. On Earth, General Choi Min-ho coordinated the final phase of the resistance plan. His forces had spent days moving into position near every Council base in the solar system. Special forces teams led by Captain Han Soo-jin were ready to strike at alien command centers on the moon and nearby asteroids. Everything had to happen at exactly the same moment or the plan would fail and humanity would be destroyed. Yoon Jie and her team of hackers had spent the past week carefully infiltrating Council computer networks. They discovered that the aliens used a central coordination system to manage their vast fleet. If this system could be disabled at the right moment, the Council ships would be unable to communicate with each other or coordinate their defenses. The hackers had planted hidden programs throughout the alien network that would activate when GA sent a single coded message. As the surrender deadline approached, Council forces relaxed their guard and prepared for victory celebrations. Alien. Soldiers on Earth began making plans for shore leave on the conquered planet. Council ships moved into ceremonial formations around major human cities. Vextar sent messages to other Council worlds announcing that another species had been successfully enslaved. Everything seemed to be going according to their ancient and proven plan. But at exactly midnight on the final day, everything changed, in an instant. The tiny devices that Lee had planted in the Council chambers activated simultaneously, sending massive electromagnetic pulses through the alien command center. At the same moment, GA triggered her hidden programs, causing the Council's computer networks to shut down completely. Suddenly, the mighty alien fleet found itself blind, deaf, and confused. Park gave the signal for the human fleet to attack, and ships emerged from hiding places throughout the solar system. The Council forces tried to respond, but their coordination systems were offline and their shields were failing under assault from Kim's specialized weapons. Alien commanders shouted orders that could not be transmitted to their ships. Council soldiers found their advanced equipment shutting down for reasons they could not understand. The trap had been sprung perfectly. The Council's arrogance and overconfidence had led them into humanity's carefully planned ambush. Now they would learn what happened when someone underestimated human intelligence, determination, and capacity for strategic thinking. The species they had dismissed as primitive was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The battle for Earth's freedom had begun, and humanity held every advantage except size. But as the Council was about to discover, size meant nothing when facing an enemy that refused to give up and had spent months preparing for exactly this moment. The galaxy was about to witness something that had never happened before in 5,000 years of Council rule. They were about to see their mighty empire begin to crumble. The space around Earth exploded into chaos as Admiral Park So-min's hidden fleet tore through the Council's confused armada like wolves attacking sheep. Her flagship emerged from behind the moon, firing Kim's specialized weapons at the massive alien command ship that had been broadcasting surrender demands to Earth. The Council ship's shields flickered and failed as electromagnetic pulses disrupted their power systems. Within seconds, the alien vessel was burning and spinning out of control. Park coordinated the attack from her command bridge, while human ships struck from every direction. The Council fleet tried to respond, but their communication systems were completely offline thanks to Yoon-jae's cyber attacks. Alien commanders found themselves unable to contact their own ships even when they were close enough to see each other. Some Council vessels fired their massive weapons wildly, hitting their own allies as often as they hit human targets. Captain Han Soo-jin led squadrons of small, fast human fighters that darted between the giant alien ships like angry insects. Her pilots had trained for months in asteroid fields, learning to fly in ways that would confuse enemies who expected traditional space combat. The Council ships were designed to fight other large vessels in organized formations. They had no defense against swarms of tiny human fighters that attacked from unexpected angles and disappeared before the aliens could react. The scene in space looked like a deadly fireworks display, as explosions lit up the darkness between Earth and its moon. Council ships that had seemed invincible just minutes before now burned and broke apart under sustained human attacks. The aliens discovered that their advanced technology meant nothing when their computer systems were offline and their shields were failing. Years of relying on superior equipment had made them lazy and unprepared for enemies who fought with determination instead of just better weapons. On the Council homeworld, Vextar watched in growing horror as reports came in from the battle around Earth. His communications officers told him that they had lost contact with most of the invasion fleet. The few messages that got through painted a picture of complete disaster. Human ships were somehow destroying Council vessels that should have been impossible to damage. The High Counselor screamed orders at his subordinates, demanding to know how primitive humans could defeat the mighty Council fleet. But Yoon-jae and her hackers had taken control of the Council's own communication networks and were using them as weapons against the aliens. Every message Vextar tried to send was intercepted and either blocked or changed to spread confusion among Council forces. The hackers turned the aliens' vast computer systems against them, feeding false information to Council commanders and disrupting their attempts to coordinate any kind of defense. General Choi Min-ho's ground forces launched simultaneous attacks on every Council base in Earth's solar system. Han Soo-jin personally led the assault on the main alien command center that had been built on the moon. Her special forces teams moved through the base like ghosts using tactics that the Council soldiers had never seen before. The aliens were trained to fight conventional battles against enemies who used similar technology and strategies. They had no idea how to deal with humans who fought like guerrilla warriors. The Council soldiers on the moon base tried to surrender when they realized their situation was hopeless, but Han's forces showed no mercy. These aliens had come to Earth planning to enslave billions of innocent people. They had threatened to kill human children and destroy human cities. Now they would learn what happened when someone made that kind of threat against humanity. Han's teams captured the base within hours and took hundreds of alien prisoners who would later provide valuable intelligence. Dr. Kim Tae-sung's weapons performed even better than expected as human ships systematically destroyed Council vessels throughout the solar system. The aliens watched their supposedly invincible shields collapse under attacks that should not have been possible. Kim had spent years studying the physics behind alien technology, and his weapons exploited every weakness he had found. The Council's overconfidence in their superior technology became their downfall as humans turned their own science against them. The battle spread beyond Earth as other alien species throughout the galaxy saw the Council's weakness and decided to rebel against their oppressors. Races that had been enslaved for centuries suddenly found hope and courage to fight for their freedom. Captain Lee Dae-ho escaped from the Council homeworld during the confusion and began leading diplomatic missions to these worlds. He shared human military technology and tactics with anyone who wanted to fight against the Council. Planet after planet rose up in revolt as news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy. The Council had ruled through fear and intimidation for thousands of years, but now their enemies saw that they could be defeated. Species that had given up all hope of freedom suddenly discovered that resistance was possible. The galaxy-wide rebellion grew stronger each day as more worlds joined the fight against their former masters. Within 2 weeks, the mighty Galactic Council's power structure began to collapse completely. Their fleets were destroyed or captured, their bases were overrun, and their computer networks belonged to humanity. The aliens who had once laughed at human weakness now hid in emergency bunkers, terrified of the species they had tried to enslave. Council members who survived the initial attack sent desperate messages begging for mercy from the primitives they had dismissed so easily. Vextar himself was captured when human forces stormed his crystal palace on the Council homeworld. The Miu, proud High Counselor who had once sat on a golden throne mocking humanity, now knelt in chains before Admiral Park. His glowing eyes were dim with fear and defeat as he realized that his ancient empire was finished. The being who had threatened to enslave billions of humans now faced judgment from the species he had tried to destroy. Park stood over the defeated alien leader and felt no satisfaction in victory, only grim determination to finish what the Council had started. This war had never been about conquest or revenge. It was about making sure that no species would ever again face the choice between slavery and destruction. The Council had ruled the galaxy through terror and oppression for far too long. How humanity would ensure that their reign of cruelty ended forever. The fighting continued on dozens of worlds as Council loyalists tried to maintain their grip on power. But the momentum had shifted completely in favor of the rebels. Human military advisors worked with freed alien species to coordinate attacks on remaining Council strongholds. The empire that had seemed unbreakable just weeks before now crumbled as its former victims united against their oppressors. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when someone threatened humanity's families and freedom. The Council's arrogance had awakened something in humans that would reshape the entire structure of galactic civilization. The species that dared to enslave Earth was about to face consequences they had never imagined possible. The real reckoning was just beginning. Admiral Park So-min walked through the ruins of the Council's greatest military stronghold 6 months after the first human victory at Earth. The massive fortress that had once commanded fear throughout the galaxy now served as a prison for the aliens who had tried to enslave humanity. Park's boots echoed in the empty corridors where council soldiers had once marched with arrogant confidence. Now those same corridors held cells filled with the former masters of the galaxy awaiting judgment for their crimes. The mighty Vextar, who had once sat on a golden throne mocking human weakness, now wore simple prison clothes and heavy chains around his 4 wrists. His glowing eyes had grown dim with despair as he realized that his ancient empire was completely destroyed. The High Counselor who had threatened to kill billions of humans now spent his days in a small cell, thinking about the terrible mistakes that had led to his downfall. Park stood outside Vextar's cell and studied the broken alien leader. She felt no joy in seeing him defeated, only a grim satisfaction that justice was finally being served. This creature had ordered the enslavement and murder of countless innocent beings throughout his long life. He had laughed as entire species were wiped out for refusing to surrender. Now he would spend whatever remained of his life paying for those crimes. Dr. Kim Tae-sung had spent the past months studying the Council's historical records that human forces captured during their invasion of alien archives. What Kim found in those files made his blood boil with anger that burned hotter than any star. The Council's crimes against the galaxy were far worse than anyone had imagined. They had enslaved over 300 different species during their reign of terror. Entire civilizations had been wiped from existence for the simple crime of wanting to remain free. Kim discovered evidence of torture chambers where Council scientists had conducted experiments on captured aliens to learn how to cause maximum pain and suffering. They had breeding programs designed to create perfect slaves from the children of conquered species. They had developed weapons specifically designed to cause slow, agonizing death rather than quick destruction. The scope of their evil was beyond anything that humans had ever imagined possible. Captain Han Soo-jin led investigation teams through abandoned council facilities throughout their former territory, documenting every crime and atrocity they could find. Her teams worked with former slaves who had survived years or decades of council oppression. These witnesses told stories of horror that made even hardened soldiers weep with anger and sadness. Every new discovery strengthened humanity's resolve to ensure that such evil could never rise again. The investigation revealed that the council members had personally participated in the worst atrocities rather than simply ordering others to commit them. They had tortured prisoners with their own hands and watched species die for their entertainment. They had kept detailed records of their crimes like twisted collectors cataloging their favorite murders. The evidence against them was overwhelming and undeniable. General Choi Min-ho organized military tribunals where council members faced justice for their crimes against the galaxy. The trials were held on worlds that had suffered under council rule, so that the victims could see their oppressors finally held accountable. One by one, the alien leaders who had thought themselves above all law were judged by representatives from every species they had wronged. Some council members tried to claim they were just following orders or ancient traditions, but the evidence of their personal cruelty was too strong to deny. Court records showed them laughing as they watched innocent beings die. Video files captured them personally torturing prisoners who had committed no crime other than loving freedom. Their own archived communications revealed them planning new atrocities and competing with each other to invent more creative forms of suffering. Yoon Ji-ae and her expanded team of hackers worked around the clock to free enslaved populations throughout former council territory. They used the aliens' own transportation networks to return conquered species to their homeworlds or help them find new places to live. Many of these civilizations had given up all hope of ever seeing freedom again after generations of slavery and oppression. The liberation process was complicated because many enslaved species had forgotten their own cultures and languages after decades or centuries under council rule. Human volunteers worked with freed aliens to help them rediscover their heritage and rebuild their societies. It was slow, difficult work, but every freed slave was a victory against the forces of tyranny and oppression. Captain Lee Dae-ho traveled constantly between liberated worlds, helping former council slaves establish new governments and write constitutions that would protect their hard-won freedom. Lee had learned from humanity's encounter with the council that democracy and individual rights were the only reliable protection against future tyrants. He shared human political philosophy with alien species who were learning to govern themselves. for the first time in generations. The new governments that emerged from the ashes of council rule were diverse and creative, reflecting the unique cultures and needs of different species. But they all shared certain common principles that Lee helped them articulate. No single group could hold absolute power over others. All beings had the right to live freely without fear of slavery or oppression. Differences between species were to be celebrated rather than used as excuses for conquest. Park established a new military alliance between all the liberated worlds to prevent any future tyrants from gaining too much power. The alliance fleet was made up of ships and crew members from dozens of different species, all working together to protect their shared freedom. Human military doctrine and technology formed the backbone of the alliance, but every member species contributed their own unique strengths and capabilities. The former council worlds were completely reorganized as independent democracies where their populations could choose their own leaders for the first time in thousands of years. Many of these worlds had never experienced anything other than authoritarian rule and needed help learning how to participate in democratic government. Human advisors worked patiently with former council citizens to teach them about voting representation and peaceful transfer of power. The transformation was not always smooth or easy. Some former council citizens had been raised to believe that slavery and oppression were natural and necessary. They struggled to understand concepts like individual rights and equality between species. But gradually, with patient education and good examples, most of them learned to embrace the principles of freedom and democracy that their former leaders had tried so hard to destroy. As the first year after the council's defeat came to an end, the galaxy had been transformed beyond recognition. Where once there had been slave worlds and prison planets, now there were thriving colonies and trading posts. The species that had once been enemies now worked together to rebuild what the council had destroyed. The foundation had been laid for a new kind of galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. 5 years had passed since the fall of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy barely resembled the dark, oppressive place it had been under alien tyranny. Admiral Park So-min stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, the massive space station that served as headquarters for the new Galactic Federation. Through the transparent walls, she could see ships from hundreds of different worlds arriving and departing as they conducted the peaceful business of free civilizations. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering built by dozens of species working together. Each section reflected the unique architectural styles and cultural preferences of different worlds. Human engineering combined with alien materials and designs to create something that no single species could have achieved alone. The result was both beautiful and functional, a symbol of what could be accomplished when beings work together instead of trying to dominate each other. Park had been elected as the first human representative to the Federation Council, a position she never would have imagined holding during her military career. The Federation was nothing like the old Galactic Council that had ruled through fear and intimidation. Every member world had an equal voice in decision-making regardless of their size or technological level. Disputes were settled through negotiation and compromise rather than conquest and slavery. The Federation Council chamber was designed as a perfect circle with no elevated throne or position of special prominence. Representatives from over 400 worlds sat in comfortable chairs arranged so that everyone could see and hear each other clearly. The debates could be passionate and sometimes heated, but they always remained civil and focused on finding solutions that would benefit everyone involved. Dr. Kim Tae-sung had become the director of the Federation Science